It was one thing when Cindy McCain said that Barack Obama had voted against her son because he voted against a troop funding bill that failed to include a timeline, just as her husband had voted against a troop funding bill that had a timeline. That was just a mendacious attack on a politician. Tonight, though, in our third story, Cindy McCain's mendacious attack on the troops themselves. In an interview with Marie Claire magazine, of all places, she was asked whether McCain's POW experience is still with them. Quote, the question, no cold sweats in the middle of the night, Cindy? Oh, no, 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 no. My husband, he'd be the first one to tell you that he was trained to do what he was doing. The guys who had trouble were the 18-year-olds who were drafted. He was trained. He went to the Naval Academy. He was a trained United States naval officer, and so he knew what he was doing. Translation, if you enlisted in the military, if you did get training, if you were, say, 19 years old, you're not supposed to have cold sweats. This during Mental Illness Awareness Week, coming as news, we assume, to the estimated 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan troops facing depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. At this point, let's turn into John Soltz, who served as an Army captain in Iraq and is now, of course, chairman of VoteVets.org. John, thanks for your time tonight.
My pleasure, Keith.
Even if we grant some element of truth here, the training might mitigate psychological impacts of injuries and combat experience and captivity. What should we make of Mrs. McCain's statement there?
I was floored when I heard it. It's absolutely offensive. I mean, in Iraq we had a saying, IEDs don't discriminate, that they affect young people, that they affect old people, higher rank, lower rank, soldiers of all of the Army, the Marine Corps. And so it's just set this debate back 30 years. We fought so hard for people to accept PTSD as an illness where 1 in 3 people are having problems coming home, and it just shows that she doesn't really understand the issue at hand, and that's a big concern as she becomes the First Lady. Yeah,
and to say nothing of the civilians. I mean, PTSD in New York was, their estimates have been through the roof about that since 9/11, the undiagnosed cases, let alone diagnosed ones. But back to this point, she seemed to, and it's a little vague, but she seemed to attribute these views, her views, to the senator himself. Are we seeing something of internal military elitism at work here, that the admiral's son could handle this, the grunts could not?
Well, I think for her it's ignorance, and obviously 1/3 of the soldiers coming back from Iraq aren't elite aviators from the Naval Academy. They're ground troops. So it's a certain ignorance, and something that VoteVets has worked on all year is this issue of diagnosis of PTSD in the Veterans Administration. We had got some letters from a VA in Texas that basically was saying, let's give people adjustment disorders and say they're just not adjusting okay. So it's hard to define whether or not someone actually has PTSD, and if they don't code you with PTSD, then you don't get veterans benefits, you don't get disability, and you fall out of the system. And that's where we get homeless veterans, and that's where we get higher suicides. So I think that's the real concern for veterans across the country right now, is that how can you help all of these troops coming back with PTSD if you don't think it exists? And so it's a huge concern moving forward.
And Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America just put out its grading of senators on vets issues. McCain got a D, Obama got a B. Is that fair? Is it unfair to ask whether the callousness in this interview is reflected in the policy?
That rating should send that should send the cold chill down Cindy McCain's spine. I mean, I stand by the scorecard that IAVA put out. I mean, Senator McCain carried the water for the White House in opposition to the GI Bill this year. He has not led on veterans issues in the last 4 or 6 years since these vets have come home. He voted against body armor not once but twice in 2003 when there were shortages in Iraq. He was against the Webb-Hagel dwell time bill in 2007. So his issue is spotty. And to be honest, Senator Hagel and Senator Webb led the fight for the GI Bill. And of all people, Senator Biden is really the leader in the Senate who took on the MRAP issue to get the newest up-armored equipment to Iraq to help our troops. So Senator McCain's record on veterans issues recently has been abysmal, and I think that his wife's statements give us some insight on that.
I think you're right. John Soltz of VoteVets.org. Thank you, John.